You know I've seen it happen 1,000 times. Someone comes to this work with such hope, such clarity. They imagine the wish fulfilled. They feel it. They taste it. They walk in that assumption for days, maybe even weeks. And then one morning they look around, see that the external world hasn't yet conformed, and they say it. That one sentence. That one habit of thought that quietly erases every bit of inner work they've done. They say, well, it hasn't happened yet. That one sentence. That one habit of thought that quietly erases every bit of it of then. And in that moment, in that single act of giving reality to the absence, they reset the entire process. They undo their own creation. If you've been applying this law and wondering why nothing seems to move, why your desire feels further away now than when you began, I want you to consider something. It might not be that you're doing the work incorrectly. It might be that you're doing the work beautifully. And then you're coming behind yourself each day and dismantling it with one unconscious habit. The habit of updating your imagination with current three-dimensional evidence. That's what we're here to talk about today. Because this one habit, this seemingly innocent act of checking the facts, is undoing all your work. Welcome. If this is your first time here, you've arrived at a place where we explore the teachings of Neville Goddard, not as theory, not as philosophy, but as lived experience, as practical mysticism you can test tonight. And if you've been with us, welcome back. Today's episode is called This One Habit is Undoing All Your Work. And I promise you, by the end of our time together, you will see clearly the invisible saboteur that has been living in your own mind, and you will know exactly how to stop feeding it. We're going to talk about why the phrase "it hasn't happened yet" is not a neutral observation but a creative act. Why your imagination must remain faithful to the wish fulfilled regardless of what the senses report, and how to finally stop arguing for your limitations. Let's begin. Let me start by telling you what Neville told us again and again. Consciousness is the only reality, not consciousness and something else, not consciousness plus the outer world, consciousness alone. The world you walk through, the circumstances you find yourself in, the people you encounter, all of it, every last bit of it, is consciousness pushed out. It is the objectified state of your inner conversations, your habitual feeling of yourself, your deep assumptions about what is true. When you truly accept this, I mean when you accept it, not as a nice idea, but as the structure of reality itself, everything changes. Because if consciousness is the only reality, then the act of observing your current circumstances and concluding it hasn't happened yet is not passive. It is not you simply noting the facts. It is you actively choosing which reality to give your allegiance to. It is you selecting the state of absence and planting your flag there. And creation, my friend, is loyal. It doesn't judge your choice. It simply hardens into fact whatever you persist in assuming to be true. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but it is a fact. The thing I desire is not here. I can look around right now and confirm that. The money is not in the account. The person has not called. The health condition has not changed. These are not opinions. These are not opinions. These are facts. And you're right. They are facts. But here is what you must understand. Facts are the fruit of former states of consciousness. They are the hardened residue of what you once assumed, perhaps without even knowing you were assuming it. A fact is not a cause. It is an effect. And if you continue to give facts the power to inform your imagination, if you let the outer world tell the inner world what is true, you lock yourself in a perfect loop. Yesterday's assumptions create today's facts, and today's facts reinforce yesterday's assumptions, and nothing ever moves. Neville called this being a servant of time. You're waking up for time to bring you your desire. You're waking up for the evidence to arrive so you can finally feel fulfilled. But that is not how creation works. Creation works from the inside out, not the outside in. You do not wait for the thing to happen so that you can feel it real. You feel it real, persistently, until the thing has no choice but to harden into fact. This is the law. It is impersonal. It does not care whether you believe it. It is operating right now, this very moment as we speak. The question is not whether it works. The question is, what are you assuming? What are you persisting in? What inner conversation are you looping in your mind, day after day, every time you check the mirror, the bank account, the phone? Here's what I see so often. Someone hears this teaching. They get excited. They do the work. They enter the state of the wish fulfilled in their imagination. Maybe they do it beautifully. They construct the scene. They loop it. They feel the relief, the satisfaction, the reality of it. And then they open their eyes. They go about their day. And somewhere in that day, usually within the first hour, they check. They look to see if anything has shifted. They look for a sign. They scan the environment for evidence that it's working. And when they don't see it yet, when the outer world is still reflecting the old state, they have a thought. It's such a small thought. It barely registers. But they think, well, it hasn't happened yet. And that's it. That's the reset button. In that moment, they have reaffirmed the state of lack. They have updated their imagination with three-dimensional evidence. They have taken the feeling of the wish fulfilled and replaced it with the feeling of the wish unfulfilled. And the law, loyal as ever, begins to harden that assumption into fact. Let me tell you what Neville said in one of his lectures. He said, "Do not ask yourself how it will come to pass. Do not look for signs that it is on its way. Simply dare to assume that it is already done, and continue in that assumption no matter what your senses tell you." Do you hear that? No matter what your senses tell you. Because your senses are reporting the past. They are showing you the outpicturing of your former state. If you let them dictate your inner state, you will never move forward. You will live your entire life in the echo of yesterday. This is what I mean when I say the habit of updating your imagination with current evidence is undoing all your work. You are doing the inner work, yes, but then you are fact-checking it against the outer world. And every time the outer world doesn't match, you withdraw your assumption. You retract your faith. You step back into the state of waiting. Hoping is a state. Hoping is a state. Needing is a state. Hoping is a state. Needing is a state. Hoping is a state. Needing is a state. And if you occupy those states, those are the states that will harden into your experience. You will become someone who is perpetually waiting, perpetually hoping, perpetually needing. Not because the law failed, but because the law succeeded. It gave you exactly what you assumed. Now let me go deeper. Let's talk about what happens in consciousness. When you say the words, "It hasn't happened yet," you think you're just making an observation. But language is not neutral. Words are not empty. They are thick with assumption. When you say it hasn't happened yet, you are doing three things simultaneously, whether you realize it or not. First, you are affirming the reality of time as a barrier between you and your desire. You are saying, there is a gap, there is a distance, there is a future moment when it will happen, and this is not that moment. Second, you are affirming the reality of the outer world as the standard of truth. You are saying, the inner is not that moment. Second, you are affirming the reality of the outer world as the standard of truth. You are saying, imagination is not enough. It only counts if the outer reflects it. And third, you are affirming your identity as someone who does not yet have the thing. You are claiming the state of absence as your state. You are saying, I am someone who is still waiting. I am someone who is still hoping. 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 I am someone who is still without. Do you see it now? It hasn't happened yet is not a passive statement. It is a creative decree. It is an assumption. And whatever you say, so every time you say it, even silently, even as a fleeting thought, you re-enter the state of lack, and the state you occupy is the state that externalizes. Neville said something in Feeling is the Secret that I want you to really hear. He said the feeling of the wish fulfilled must be sustained without effort. If there is effort, there is separation between you and the state. You are still outside of it, trying to get in. But the moment you are simply in it, simply wearing it as your natural state, the thing must come. And how do you wear it as your natural state? By refusing to let the evidence of the senses talk you out of it. By refusing to acknowledge the so-called facts as anything more than shadows of a former state. By daring, against all appearances, to remain faithful to the unseen. Let me give you an example. I once knew a woman who wanted to heal a relationship with her daughter. They hadn't spoken in over a year. The outer facts were grim. Every attempt at reconciliation had failed. The daughter had made it clear she wanted no contact. Anyone looking at the situation would say, "It's over. Let it go. Accept the facts." But this woman understood something. She understood that facts are not final. She understood that consciousness is the only reality. So she began to imagine. Every night she would enter into the feeling of her daughter calling her, laughing with her, being warm and close again. She didn't imagine the call coming someday. She imagined it as already done. She heard the voice, felt the relief, felt the naturalness of their connection restored. And during the day, when her mind would wander to the current situation, when she would remember that the phone hadn't rung, that the silence was still there, she would catch herself. She would stop the thought. She wouldn't say, "It hasn't happened yet." She would simply return to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. She would remind herself, in consciousness, it is already done. I don't have to wait for the outer world to catch up. I simply have to remain in the state. She did this for 3 months, not hoping it would happen, not wondering when it would happen, simply living from the end. And then one afternoon, the phone rang. It was her daughter. The conversation was warm. It was natural. It was as though the rift had never been. And afterward the daughter said something interesting. She said, "I don't know why I stopped calling you. I've been thinking about you so much lately. It just felt like it was time. Do you see what happened there?" The daughter didn't decide to call because the outer facts changed. She decided to call because the inner state changed. The woman had stopped broadcasting separation. She had stopped affirming the reality of the rift. And in consciousness, where all minds are one, the daughter responded to that shift. The outer world rearranged itself to match the inner conviction. That is the power you hold. But you cannot hold it if you keep checking the facts and letting them override your assumption. You cannot be faithful to the wish fulfilled if you're constantly updating your imagination with evidence of the wish unfulfilled. Here's what I need you to understand. The three-dimensional world is a delayed reflection. It is always showing you who you used to be, not who you are now. If you changed your inner state this morning, the outer world might not reflect that change for days, weeks, sometimes even months, depending on how deep the shift was and how thoroughly you occupied the new state. But that delay is not a problem. It's not evidence that the law isn't working. It's simply the nature of manifestation. There is a gap between the inner act and the outer fact. Neville called this the interval, and the interval is where most people fail. Because they do the inner work, they plant the seed, and then during the interval they dig it up to see if it's growing. They check the soil, they look for sprouts, and when they don't see any, they conclude the seed is dead. So they plant a different seed, and then they dig that one up too, and they never give anything time to gestate, to mature, to press itself out into form. What you must do, what you absolutely must do if you want to master this law, is remain faithful during the interval. You must continue to assume the wish fulfilled even when the senses scream otherwise. You must close your eyes to the facts and open them to the truth. And the truth is not what is. The truth is what you are assuming to be. Because assumption, persisted in, becomes fact. That is the law. Now let's talk about why the phrase, "it hasn't happened yet," is so particularly destructive. You might think, well, at least I'm saying yet, at least I'm acknowledging it will happen eventually. But that word yet is not a comfort, it's a trap. Because yet implies time. It implies futurity. It implies that the thing you desire is ahead of you, out there in some distant moment you have not arrived at. And as long as you hold that assumption, you will always be in the state of not yet. And not yet is a state of lack. And not yet is a state of not yet. And not yet is a state of not. It is a state of separation. It is a state of waiting. And waiting is not creation. Waiting is the denial of creation. Neville said, "The past and the future are only present assumptions." Think about that. The future is not some far-off moment you will someday reach. The future is not some far-off moment you will someday reach. The future is a present assumption. When you say, "it hasn't happened yet," you're assuming a future in which you still do not have the thing. You are projecting lack forward. You are extending the state of absence into tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. And because assumption creates reality, you lock yourself into a perpetual state of waiting. The thing is always coming but never arriving, because you are always assuming it has not yet arrived. This is why Neville insisted over and over, that you must live in the end, not live toward the end, not wait for the end, not wait for the end, live in the end. Occupy the state of the wish fulfilled now as a present fact in consciousness, not as something you will experience someday, but as something you are experiencing now in imagination, because imagination is the real world. The world you see with your physical eyes is the unreal world. The world you see with your physical eyes is the unreal world. It is shadow. It is effect. Imagination is cause. Let me put it this way. If you wanted to travel to a distant city, you wouldn't stand in your current city and say, "I'm not there yet," and expect that statement to transport you. You would get on a plane. You would move. You would travel. And in consciousness, traveling means assuming. It means occupying the state. It means feeling yourself into the new reality until it becomes your natural dwelling place. And once you're there, once you've taken up residence in the state of the wish fulfilled, you don't keep looking back at where you used to be and saying, "But I'm not there yet." You're already there. In consciousness, you've already arrived. The outer world is just catching up. Here's the practice I want to give you today, and I want you to take this seriously. For the next 7 days, I want you to commit to this. You are going to stop updating your imagination with current three-dimensional evidence. You're going to stop checking the facts. You're going to stop saying out loud or silently, "It hasn't happened yet." Instead, you are going to do this. Every single time your mind wanders to your desire, every time you think about the thing you want, you are going to consciously, deliberately return to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. You are not going to assess where you are in the process. You are not going to evaluate how close or far you are. You are simply going to feel it done. You are going to close your eyes if you need to, even for just 10 seconds.